Dragon Ball Super Superhero is not the latest thing we've actually seen in the Dragon Ball timeline. It's easy to forget that these days with the amount of content we've had since Dragon Ball Super began, but Dragon Ball Z's final 3 episodes, 289 to 291, take place the furthest into the Dragon Ball timeline that we've seen, which is often referred to as the end of Z. This is actually easily looked over due to the fact that Superhero's rendition of Pan did look slightly older than the version we used to see at the end of Z, but it's just a design change. Timeline-wise, Superhero is very close to the end of Z, but it isn't quite as far as the end of Z. Why this is important to mention is it actually makes the likelihood of Dragon Ball Super returning after the end of Z in the story quite unlikely. Trying to explain which order to watch Dragon Ball in would get even more confusing and convoluted if Super returns post-Z, because then the order of watch would be Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super, Dragon Ball Super Broly, Dragon Ball Super Superhero, Dragon Ball Z 289 to 291, Dragon Ball Super Series 2. It just sounds all over the place. Can you imagine trying to explain that to somebody who hasn't seen the show before? So what's more likely to happen now is that Dragon Ball Super will end with Superhero or the movie that follows, and a new Dragon Ball era will begin shortly after that. However, this could possibly be avoided if what they choose to do is retell the final 3 episodes of Dragon Ball Z in the next story that they tell, whether that be a Dragon Ball Super Series 2, or whether they give it a completely new name, or whether they actually covered that particular portion of the story in a movie that comes out, thereby foregoing the final 3 episodes of Z and instead tell a new version of the ending that features cameos from newer characters and forms that were introduced in Super. Because of course so much was introduced in Dragon Ball Super so far, it kind of makes it hard or pretty jarring to go back and watch the final 3 episodes of Z knowing that Frieza's currently alive and got a golden and a black form, Goku's had multiple transformations, here I count 4, 5 if you count Kaioken Super Saiyan Blue, Vegeta and such are all gods, Gohan now has a beast form, Piccolo can go orange. It makes it so difficult to watch those final 3 episodes of Z knowing all of this is possible, but it just doesn't happen. This of course isn't actually impossible because it's already happened once before, by Toriyama himself. We'll talk about this more later. Retelling arcs isn't something Dragon Ball Super has been afraid to do in the past, with Battle of Gods and Resurrection F both having their stories retold in Dragon Ball Super's anime, despite already being feature-length movies. This of course was done to add padding and to fix a few inconsistencies that were created in the previous movies that they found out about after they actually put it in the movies. Go figure. And for the most part, these fixes worked well. Having said that, this decision to tell these stories again at the beginning of Dragon Ball Super was initially met with bad reactions from the fans, and Dragon Ball Super has seemingly decided against doing the same thing with Broly so far, even going as far as to not cover it in Toyotaro's manga, even though he's now covering the latest movie in his manga, so he's effectively just skipped Broly. You put it in a flashback in one of the most recent manga chapters, but it's not really the same. All this to say that Dragon Ball Super is not afraid to retell parts of Z inside of its own show. No, that wasn't a mistake. It's easy to forget that both Battle of Gods and Resurrection F were both under the Dragon Ball Z moniker at their time of release, and not the Dragon Ball Super moniker, like Broly and Superhero were. So should Dragon Ball Super decide to retell the end of Z within its own series or a new movie, continuing past that point wouldn't be too much of an issue. It could be very possible that when Super returns, it returns as Dragon Ball Super Series 2. That would be easy enough to direct people to watch Super Series 1, watch Broly, watch Superhero, and then watch Super Series 2, because you're effectively cutting out the Dragon Ball Z ending. Whether Super should retell Dragon Ball Z's ending is another story though. Should you mess with the original that's already loved so much? Well, let's be honest, Z's ending was left the way it was because Toriyama had already had conversations to let Toei continue making Dragon Ball content when he'd stopped making the manga. It wasn't the most satisfying ending, nor a truthful conclusion. Toriyama would later revise this ending a decade or so later, not changing much other than the addition of giving Oob the Nimbus Cloud, called the Kinto One. That being said, in reality, I don't really see much praise myself for Dragon Ball Z's ending. Not in modern times, anyway. Rather, I hear more people praise the ending of Dragon Ball, where Goku and Chi-Chi get married, and I also hear more people praise the ending of Dragon Ball GT because it had much more of a satisfying conclusion to the series. So would people be that upset if Dragon Ball Z's ending was redone? I think it depends. I think if it still ends with Goku saying goodbye to everybody because he's going to live in Oob's village, then I think people will be understandably irritated with this. But if they give us more of a drawn-out world tournament, with perhaps a better lineup of matchups, and actually animate a few of them so we can actually see Goten and Trunks proceed in the tournament. They could also include a few super characters here and there, and besides Goku, also give Vegeta, Piccolo and Gohan a story perhaps for the arc. I think it could be worth the redo. For instance, Vegeta may actually be off on Sadala at this point and miss the tournament, which is what drives Trunks to enter, thinking if his dad isn't there, he might have more of a chance of winning. Vegeta may be with Kaba and meeting the Saiyan King at the time, which gives him a nice side story and an excuse to not be there. Vegeta is then with his student, whilst Goku is meeting his new student. It's a nice parallel. You could even do something where Oob accidentally activates Ultra Instinct during the fight, which is what excites Goku into wanting to train him more specifically than sticking around with Pan or anything like that, because personally I've always found it really hard to accept that Goku just ups and leaves his family, ditches Pan, who has been shown to have all this potential, to go and train some kid he's just met. To me, I was never really a fan of Z's ending. So the prospect of them being able to retell it in more of a logical sense in Dragon Ball Super, I actually think is a really good idea. Beerus and Whis could be up in the stands watching the tournament and gorging themselves on the tournament food that Goku was always so complimentary of in the series, which could be a nice throwback. Buller might actually be involved in a fighting role this time and actually have a match with Pan, which could be great fun. A great throwback to Goten vs Trunks at the World Tournament and the Junior Division final. And all this could tie in really nicely with Trunks and Goten looking at them with worry when they realise how strong these kids have both become. This would be really funny and add another layer of the Pan and Buller story. Even though you're not having a situation where they've spent all this time apart, because of course that's one of the big inconsistencies with Z's ending when you watch Super before it. They're all supposed to have not seen each other for a really long time. Well, these days, now with how Supers fit into it, that's just been completely negated. They've seen each other all the time. Goku went shopping with Bulma last week. It's not the same situation at all. However, to add to the feeling of, wow, we are seeing people interact that we don't really see interact normally, and they're having a nice get-together and it feels really special, you could have something like Android 17 and his family visit Krillin and 18 and Maron, and then you just get this feeling of, oh wow, this is different, this is nice, this is new. These are all small changes that could really add to the overall experience of the arc. Going back to the mention of Oob using Ultra Instinct, what could happen here to explain Goku's absence is that Whis could offer to let Goku train Oob on their planet, with hopes of if Goku can train Oob to become strong enough, if things don't work out with Broly, then perhaps he'll be able to take Beerus' place of God of Destruction when the time comes. I say if things don't work out with Broly, I don't know that Broly's being prepped to take that mantle from Beerus, but you never know. I mean, there's got to be a good reason to let Broly train up there with them, right? But they just haven't explained it yet. This may explain why Goku is away from his family more after Dragon Ball Z's ending, because it is more of a full-time job to train somebody to take a God of Destruction job, aside from just simply being trained to fight. Now, this isn't to suggest that Goku will leave permanently for this time, of course. If it's retold in Super, you could just use it as a good excuse to leave Goku out of the occasional arc because he's busy with Oob, much like seems to have been the tested formula with Dragon Ball Super Superhero. Yes, Dragon Ball Super Superhero could very well have been a test to see how fans would react to having a story that doesn't heavily feature Goku and Vegeta and more puts them in a side aspect of the entire thing. And considering Super Superhero did very, very well, that's a really good sign for the future of Dragon Ball. Again, should Goku leave with Oob again in the retelling of the end of Z, the potential of putting the future of the story onto the other characters' shoulders, such as Gohan, could very much be a reason as to why the show would get a name change in this situation. It just makes a lot more sense to change the name of the show when the main character is potentially changing. Not to say that it wouldn't be called Dragon Ball anymore, of course it would be, and that's not to suggest it might not have the Super title in there, it possibly might do, but it might be Dragon Ball Super Gohan or something like that. I'm not trying to come up with the name's title right now, I'm not expecting it to be creative, but what I'm trying to say is you could have a name change to suggest that the story is headed in a different direction. So what do you guys think? Do you think it's not worth changing the ending of Dragon Ball Z? Would it not necessarily be a big deal to have to introduce it to somebody new and have to explain how to watch it in a very convoluted order? Or do you think that they should make it easier to follow, make a new series, and then retell the ending of Z and have it continue in a much more straightforward fashion? Let me know what you think in the comments section down below, and please, if you did enjoy the video, just remember to give it a thumbs up because it really does help the channel out and it really does help the performance of the video out. And remember to subscribe for more Dragon Ball content in future, and until we meet again, I'll catch you in the next video. Bye!